We're lifting the boat in Faro, southern Portugal. If you're somewhere with a modern travel lift, then lifting your boat really shouldn't be a problem. Just make sure you've got a picture of the underneath of your hull to show the lift operators so they know where to put the strops. We have some marks on the hull as well to show exactly where they should go. First thing is a pressure wash, and this should get most things off, but it's a moment of truth really when you find out exactly what you're in for. Just got the basic anti-fouling really here to do. There's not a lot of problems with the boat. It's come out and been jet washed and is pretty clean, so I'm just going to take you through what the basics of that would be step by step. I mean, obviously first thing is to get an anti-foul on. If there is anything loose, little bits like this that's flaky, it's just like doing your plastering at home really. You're not going to paint over stuff that's peeling, so you're going to make sure anything that's slightly peeling comes off, because otherwise it's just going to come off and take your nice new anti-fouling off with it. You've got to make sure that whatever anti-fouling you'll put on is compatible with the one that's there. Sometimes it's just a matter of scrubbing it down. Sometimes you've got to actually put a barrier coat on, a primer on before you put that on. And of course, if it's in bad condition, you'll be taking it all off, and that's a different prospect. We're not covering that here. We'll be looking at prop maintenance as well as the hull, the black art of sacrificial anodes, and of course anti-fouling. I'm even having a go at gel coat repairs. Okay, first things first then, get all your ducts lined up. There's nothing more frustrating than starting a job like this, especially if you're only out for a week or two and finding you haven't got the bits you need. So tools are fairly obvious. Make sure you've got lots of paint rollers and trays. You're going to go through lots of those. But other things that you should have sort of at all times really, I think, things like a proper full set of anodes. I mean, you never really know when you might have to come out, and actually if you're in an area with a good tidal range, it might be that you're just up against a wall or careening posts and there for a tide to do a certain job, and if you're there and an anode needs changing, you've got it, great, you can get that done as well. So we always make sure I've got a full set of anodes around. Other things I buy in bulk, like these Nyrale gloves, you'll use loads of those. They come in boxes of 100. I like these foam brushes, really useful. You get big boxes of those. And I use disposable coveralls. These are sort of paper ones. They're quite fragile, but you just use them once, and they've got a hood so it stops things going in your hair. These are useful as well. I bought a box of about 200 of these years ago, still going strong. There's lots of things you need little syringes for, and actually these things here are actually tongue depressors. I found them on Amazon, a box of about 1,000 I think for no money at all, and just great for stirring paint. So you always shoot with something to stir paint with, and you end up using your screwdriver, which is never a good idea. First decision then is what anti-foul you're going to use. It's probably not something you will carry with you. It's bulky and it goes off, and really you need to get one that's good for the area you're in. What I was using actually for this was something that was recommended by practical boat owner for English shores, CJet 33. It was the sort of best for the area I was in on the south coast of the UK, and you know it's done very well with that. I don't know what it's going to be like here. I've got some left over, so I'm going to use 2 cans and then put on whatever people say is good for this area. You want to have the right one really. The other thing that's major to be done is this, looking at the prop. What I did with this time was take it all the way back to the brass. It's lovely, it's sacrilege really to paint it, because you have this lovely shiny brass, but then actually you scour it, so you get some quite coarse grit, wet and dry on it, and use a special paint, which is this stuff that I use, Velox. And I'm really pleased with that. It's done a really good job. It's a 2-part thing, so you use this primer first and then the other one, and it's really coatable, so that's all I'll have to do with this, because it's not in bad nick. I'll just go around and take the worst off and give it another coat. And it comes off. This one's not really that worn. Normal rule is that you'd replace them when they're 50% gone, but I'll replace this one anyway. I know it's not that worn, but it's a very expensive prop and it's not worth risking it.
Now the instructions on the Velox paint say in preparation you should just rub it down with a 3Ms pad. You can do this twice, it says, before you need to go back to the bare metal. Normally I have to take it down to the bare metal every time. That's really time consuming, and if you're going to try and buff it up to a really high shine, some people swear by that as the best method. I think if you can take the prop off and get it on a proper buffer and get it really shiny, that may work. I've never managed to get it really good when it's in situ, and it fouls up very quickly. And I've tried all the other ones, the lanolin type stuff, which is a sort of sheep's oil, and different paints. But this one's the best one I've found, I think, the Velox so far. So while that's drying, it's onto the Antifoul. Really good scrape to get anything that's even remotely loose away. Then I ferret out with a wet mesh sander, better than wet and dry or sandpaper that clog up too much, I think.
Bit of primer on the patches.
And if you've got any plates for things like kill coolers on your hull or an SSB radio, then these you have to really protect. Make sure that you mask them off completely, because they're made of sintered bronze, which has tiny holes in it. It's like a sponge to give it a massive surface area. And if you get any anti-foul in this, you're not going to be able to get that out. It's not like just wiping it off a zinc. You can't get it off this and you'll ruin it. So just make sure you don't get any anti-foul on there. Mask them all off. Antifoul takes a lot of stirring, especially if it's old. There's lots of heavy metals, there's copper in there, other bits that just need a lot of stirring to get them back into suspension. So give it a really good go. And when you apply it, if it goes on like a thick emulsion, then you're okay. I mean, you can get gauges that you scrape across the wet antifoul to see how many microns thick it is. Check the can, it'll tell you the recommended thickness. But I find that if it's going on like this, like wet emulsion, then it's going to be about right. Common wisdom is to put an extra coat on all the high wear areas. So for me, that's the rudder, the waterline and the leading edges of the keel. I actually do two, so I'll do one right at the beginning, then do my full coats, and then do another one at the end with whatever I've got left. The antifoul we're using is an ablative. That means it rubs off. That's the best thing for sailboats that don't go too fast. You can't use it on a speedboat that's going really fast through the water. But the ablative means that it'll gradually wear down. You don't build up that thickness over years and years, so you don't have to stop and scrape it all off so often. And things fall off it. They can't get a grip so much as it tends to wear away. Good, obviously, to be using your boat a lot. So it's got the biocides there, so the marine life won't want to stick to it. Don't forget to get a little bit inside all your seat cots. Barnacles love to hide in there. Top coat for the prop, it needs 2 coats. They say to put it on with minimal overbrushing and do the second coat at 90 degrees to the first. Okay, the last coat's been put on the prop, so this is going to just need a little buff up with a 3Ms pad before we put it back in the water. That just activates the anti-fouling properties of the paint before you put it in. Another thing that's going to have to be done just before it goes back in, because I can't find my grease nipples, is grease the prop. Judy's bringing some grease nipples over for me. It's just 2 little grub screws that come out here. And you grease it. Basically, grease comes out of the joints here. You rock it backwards and forwards and just keep squirting it through until you get clean grease through. I'll make that all nice and smooth again. Anode has to go back on, and I've been putting a little good job. Julie's not here actually, because I'm using her nail varnish to put around the edges of the zinc here. And the reason for that is that it's a bad design really with these zincs. They're quite thin at the edges, and if that wears through as the zincs wear down, then they can even fall off, but they come loose, and to be honest, by the time they're loose, they're not really working anyway. They've got to be clamped up tight. So the nail varnish is just to try to delay the loss of zinc around the screws. So the most important bit really is to keep this good connection with this brass surface. I keep calling it brass, actually bronze. It's manganese bronze actually that this prop is made of. You've got to keep good connection between the zinc and the bronze, and that means making sure it's screwed up tight and stays that way. So obviously put some sort of Loctite on there, and make sure it's done up nice and tight and stays that way. You'll find if you get a problem with the bronze, it starts to go a little bit pink. It's called zincification, and that's basically because the alloy of bronze, certainly the manganese alloy, has zinc in it, and that will start to leach out if your actual sacrificial anode here, your zinc isn't working. So it'll start leaching that through. You really don't want that to happen, so keep an eye on it. Cleaning up the shaft here for the anode that goes on the back of the prop, between the prop and the rope cutter. The rope cutter itself has got a little anode which is hardly eaten away, but I'll change it anyway since I've got a spare. The bearings in here, normally you take the whole thing across. It runs on a couple of PTFE bearings, and you can change those when they're warm, but these are okay. Rope cutter is a good idea. If you haven't got one, I would definitely advise to put one on. These ones are called spurs, and you can see it's just a scissor action, so anything that's in there will come through and hopefully get guillotined off. We're quite lucky here in that our prop's well protected, but you can always get a loose line that gets sucked in, so it's as well to have something there. So the zinc's on the shaft here, as well as the one on the rope cutter that I'm just tightening up. I am using actual zincs for my anodes here, but if you're on fresh water, they shouldn't be zinc, they should be magnesium. The zinc doesn't actually work very well. You can see here what happens. This actually, when we bought Fair Isle, she was on fresh water in the Markermeer in Holland, and she'd been there for 6 months or so, and that's what happens. You get this sort of white coating on the zinc, and it just puts it to sleep basically. You can go down and wire brush it and get it to work again, but you know, obviously it's no good if that sort of thing's happening. So really you should be using magnesium if you're on fresh water, but what you can also use, and a lot of people use if they're on brackish water, is aluminium. And actually aluminium is a better thing to use than zinc. The boat industry should wake up really and sort this out, because zincs aren't good for the marine environments because they release cadmium into the ocean. And really the only reason we used zinc in the first place was that it was much cheaper than aluminium. Aluminium now is as cheap as zinc, and if they made zincs, you'd have to have the whole boat in aluminium if you're going to switch to aluminium. You can't do one or two, and I can't do that for this boat because there are several of the anodes that I can't get in aluminium. I can only get them in zinc, which is a shame, because I would do that, because the aluminium is actually better, it lasts longer, it's more effective, it's better for the environment. So if we could do it, then aluminium would be a good option. Work your way around the anodes. Perhaps the most important is the anode that's attached to your boat's bonding system. This is usually on the hull and is through bolted to a bus bar type arrangement that has all the leads going off to the seacocks and anything else that needs protecting. I'll be cleaning up all those connections, but first let's get the boats undone and the anode off the hull. You bed the new zinc in with Silkaflex or some equivalent, and as you can see my one's blocked up, so I'm not going to waste it at £10 a tube, so I've cut it open and I'm spooning it out. Because this zinc isn't bolted up against the piece of metal that it's protecting, it's only the bolts that are providing the connection, so I need to make these as good as possible, so I'm taking a lot of care and putting some dielectric grease around the washers and the top of the bolt head. And then when it's on, they get nicely sealed in. The old anode was quite depleted in this one, so I'm going to fit a bigger one. You can put as big a one as you like on here, as long as the bolt holes are the right distance apart so you can actually get it on. Okay, I mentioned dielectric grease before and I get lots of comments, so I just want to go through this because it's a bit counterintuitive to put something that's an insulator on something that you want to be a good connection. But let me explain it like this. The good connection comes from bolting two pieces of metal together, from actually pushing them together. It's that metal to metal contact that's there. If there's any gap, an air gap is the worst you can get. Air's a fantastically good insulator. Lightning's the only thing that gets through it. So an air gap is what you don't want. So you bolt things up tightly, push them on tightly, whatever it is, whatever your connection is, and it's that metal to metal contact that's the bit that's conducting your electricity. So having grease on there makes no difference to that, because when you bolt something up, it squashes that out. Just as the same as it pushes the air out, it pushes the grease out, it goes. So you still get that metal to metal contact. What does happen though is all the little bits in between it, the little imperfections, little pits in the metal, get filled with the dielectric grease, and that stops corrosion. We've got lots of salt water around boats. This is in the bilge here, so you know you could get something go across that. It'll creep into that joint. If there were no grease there, it could eat in, and it would be in the bits right next to where your good connection is, and might corrode that and make that then a bad connection. So yeah, it's a good thing to have, certainly in all your electrical connections. Do you have to have it for zincs? No, probably not. You'll probably get a good connection. In fact, that's because they've got a big surface area. They connect directly onto the metal, and that sort of size of surface area should be fine. But ones like this, I mean, it's only a small surface area there, and then via the bonding round to all of the rest of the seacocks and everything else that you want to protect on the boat. So you might as well give it the best chance possible. While we're on the subject, there's a lot of fallacies, things that people believe will happen with anodes, like the fact that you might be able to hang an anode over the side of your boat and it do something. Well, it'll do absolutely nothing. It needs to be bonded to the metal that it's protected. It do absolutely nothing on its own. You find racing boats that do have them dangling over the side because they don't have any anodes on their hull, but it's not dangling by a bit of string, that's dangling by a wire which is connected into the bonding system, so it's doing exactly the same job, just not attached to the hull. Give yourself time for all this. It's hard work and it'll take longer than you think. I'm splitting this session up with a trip back to England. Bruce's yard, where we are, is virtually on the runway, so it's very convenient. Okay, back on the boat then, just as the sun goes down. Got about a week to finish off before Judy gets back and we can launch and get going again. And I've got to finish off the antifouling because I didn't have enough of the old stuff. And in fact, asking around here, there actually wasn't any good recommendations. And in fact, you couldn't really buy it locally. And to get it ordered in Portugal, it would cost about €200 a can, and I'm talking about £90 a can, so half the price in England. So what I ended up doing is deciding I'll stick with what I've got, the CJ33. So moment of truth, I've got my bag here. I've been warned by my dad, that who's lived on my boat for many years, that people have bought this stuff out and it's leaked. So I can't imagine the consequences of it leaking, but yeah, no, that looks good. Got 2 cans of CJ33 in there, so I'll be finishing that off. I've also got some paint for my boot strap. They did say they had some hard red here that they could get me, but they never actually came up with it, so I've got something so I can finish off all the little bits and pieces, and we can finally get going in about a week's time. Final few things then, masking up the boot strap. Be sure to use the outdoor masking tape. It's usually blue. The white stuff will be terrible if you leave it on there too long and you'll never get it off. The Antifoul is a hard one so that you can actually go down and scrub it when it gets a little bit slimy. I then decided to tackle some small scratches on the top side. Now, I'm no expert in this, but I'll run through it anyway so you can learn from my mistakes. Firstly, dig out the scratch so it will accept some gel coat. You can use a Dremel if you have one, or just a chisel as I'm doing here, to get a nice clean edged cut. Give it a good rub down with some acetone, and then I'm using this film that's a special film for gel coat. It means you can just put it over the top and it'll hold it in place. It's quite difficult when you're putting gel coat on a vertical surface, and I've tried using fillers before to make it thicker, but that didn't work too well. It was just a little bit grainy. Mix up your colour. This is the difficult bit. My hull is British Racing green, but I have to add several types of other green to it to try and get it exactly the right shade. You can try it on the hull before you put the hardener in to see if it's the right colour match, but to be honest, it changes slightly when it dries, so you never can be completely sure. Add your hardener. Very difficult to get the right proportions when the amounts are so small. Then when you apply, you're supposed to try and really work it in. I just used a bit of a broken stick here, one of my tongue depressor type sticks, and work it in. You get air bubbles, and that's always the problem here. But with the film, it means you can pull it over the top and work it in some more, and hopefully make sure it's properly coated all the way across. Should be dry in a couple of hours, and then you can start rubbing it down. I've started with a 600 grit and worked my way all the way down to 3000. And then hit it with some grinding paste.
Use a sheep's wool pad that's coarser than the sponge ones to really get the grinding paste in there, and then you can use the sponge one with some polish at the end. Okay, the result wasn't perfect, didn't quite get the colour match right, but you have to be very close to see it now. One last job, but a really important one. Go around and check all your seacocks. It's the only opportunity to do it while you're out. Can't do this one in the water. Give them all a good wiggle, make sure that they all operate. Check that the bonding's okay, that's all strong, and have a look at them. If they're bronze, that there's no pinkness there, that there's no dezinkification going on. Then what I do is I go outside and put a little bit of grease up with the seacock closed, and then go back inside and open and close it a few times to try and smear that grease over the operating surfaces, and that should free them up and make them quite nice and easy to operate. So that's it, Fair Isle's ready to continue cruising. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell. If you haven't seen any of the cruising episodes, then here's a link to the first two. Thanks for watching.